Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. First, we have the authoritarian far left wants you dead and forgotten, posted by Amogus Devilman, and that looks like a tweet from a screenshot of a tweet from David Santacarlo, who tweeted, "Just leave us alone is no longer an option." It looks like a picture of a mural of Charlie Kirk and a picture of a mural of Irina Zurutska, and how they both got vandalized. And yeah, personally, I would agree that the authoritarian far left is a problem, especially with how pervasive they seem to be both on Reddit and in real life. But with that being said, you gotta stand against authoritarianism regardless of where it stands on the political spectrum. Libertarian positions, you gotta stand against the authoritarian far left, far right, and center. Just because someone's authoritarian doesn't mean their politics is important, but I think the more important thing to be concerned about is their authoritarianism rather than being on the far left or far right or center. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Also, it's kind of subjective what counts as far left and far right these days. Of course, on Reddit, I understand it all is going to be labeled as far right. It's very much an outgroup term, just like Nazi, fascist, etc., etc. So, you can argue the same thing of far left, but, ultimately, you gotta stand up against. If you want to label anything you want, far left or far right, that's fine. But I definitely do think labels are too pervasive in today's politics. You gotta judge people by their actions, not whatever labels you feel like giving them. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Wynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and chief operating officer, said she plans to donate $320 million to investment accounts for kids that the Trump administration launched on the 4th of July from Semaphore.com, posted by Economy Medicine 318. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, if she wants to donate that money to the Trump administration and the Trump administration wants to spend it, I think that's fine. But I don't think the government should be the one doing the thing. I think it should be a private charity instead. I think she should just be directly giving that money to the kids rather than giving it to the Trump administration to give to the kids, because government, that they always find a way to waste as much money as possible, and I think that's important to remember when it comes to funding the government, giving money to the government. Next, we have the other 98%, Mitch McConnell, posted by Mundane Image 13, and that's a Facebook post from the other 98%, and they said, copied from the FB post, Mitch McConnell is reportedly brain dead. The journalist who broke his cardiac arrest is at the hospital waiting for them to move his body. Her name is Desiree Townsend. She's the independent reporter who obtained the EMS scanner audio confirming paramedics performed CPR at McConnell's DC home on June 14th. NBC and CBS spent a week catching up to her. Yesterday, she tweeted that she's physically at the hospital, that multiple sources have told her the 84-year-old Sander has been declared brain dead, and that his Capitol Police detail was still there as of 3:39 p.m. Eastern Time. Laura Loomer posted the same claim, citing a White House source. McConnell's also will not confirm or deny. They insist he is continuing to improve. The brain death claim is not yet verified. Here's what it is. McConnell has been hospitalized for 3 straight weeks with no public explanation. His office has never been said why he was admitted. His last visit was June 11th. His wife, Elaine Chao, was photographed in Beijing meeting the Chinese vice president 3 days after her husband collapsed. She has not come home. His daughter deactivated her X account. Neighbors of his D.C. townhouse say no one has come or gone since the ambulance took him away, not family, not staff. Kentucky Democratic Governor Andy Beshear says McConnell's office is not returning his calls. Now the politics. Kentucky Republicans quietly wrote state secession law in 2024. If McConnell's seat opens, Beshear cannot appoint a replacement. A special election gets triggered instead. Then the time matters. If he can't finish his term after August 3rd, the special election gets thrown in November. Before August 3rd, the GOP has to hold a standalone race. They're watching the calendar. The election they're trying to avoid is the GOP's nightmare. Thomas Massie, the Republican congressman, has become one of Trump's loudest critics, would be a heavy favorite to run and split the red vote wide open. Every day they hide from McConnell's condition is the day they don't have to hold that race. Whatever is actually happening in the hospital room, this is the picture of them from outside it. A senator who has not been seen in 3 weeks, a wife who has left the country, a family that's gone gone dark, a governor being frozen out, and a party racing the clock on a secession law that wrote themselves, Townsend is still at the hospital. There is a lot of implications here that border on conspiracy theories, but either way, we as well should get a basic update on the health of our representatives. We need to know if they are able to do their job or not at a minimum, and so hiding McConnell's health is just wrong. And I would agree with that. I posted something similar to the Libertarian Party USA subreddit. I said, looks like Thomas Massey might get a chance to run for something after all. I shared a meme my dad shared with me over text. It says Weekend at Mitch's, and it's like Weekend at Bernie's, only Mitch McConnell's Bernie, and Mike Johnson and J.D. Vance are the other two guys holding him up. And I added, he won't serve very long since McConnell is already up for re-election this year, and Andy Barr already won the Republican primary for that, but it would be funny if they have to have a special election before then. And I also added, from the same Epstein class that brought you Weekend at Biden's. It's almost as like the gerontological husks, supposedly in positions of power, aren't the ones really running the show. The ones really running the show are deep state military industrial, the oil complex, satanic cabal, lizard people, whatever you want to call them. And yeah, just go to show you how a lot of electoral politics isn't real, because, a lot of times you just get, people, who probably aren't all there, like Mitch McConnell, who, gerontological husks, as I said earlier. And yeah, that's why, ultimately, it just goes to show you can't vote yourself free, because electoral politics is often a farce. That's why so many of our politics these days revolve around issues like chicks with dicks, and not real issues like affordability. And it just goes to show you that, it's all fake. It's really just WWE. I would say a lot of times the people really making decisions that impact our lives aren't the ones we know. They're the ones operating out of the shadows. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And next we have, he compared ISIS chief to a Nazi, so ICE tracked him down on vacation with his daughter from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think ICE should be tracking people down just for calling them Nazis. But ultimately, I think the context matters too. If he directly yelled at him that he's a Nazi, I personally think that's quite different than just posting it on social media. But regardless, I personally don't. If you want to call ICE Nazis, I think you should be able to. But with that being said, don't be surprised when they come after you. People in positions of state authority can come after you for whatever reason they want to. And purposely trying to aggravate them by calling them Nazis probably isn't the best way if you don't want them coming after you. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, Mitch McConnell's absence sparks Thomas Massey Senate speculation from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I would like if Massey gets the Senate seat. As we read in the last post, it looks like they have until August 3rd for a special election. But, if they, I don't think it really matters because, as I said earlier, electoral politics, it's often really not something that's real. It's really just theater. Thomas Massey might be one of the few good ones. But, I definitely do think, when it comes to electoral politics, the elected politicians have a lot less power than I think a lot of people think they do. I think the real power operates out of the shadows. But with that being said, I would like if Thomas Massey did get the Senate seat. But even if he did get it, he's not going to have it for very long until the November election, when Andy Barr is likely going to take over. After that, I think he gets seated in January if he does win the November election, which he's likely to do. Next we have EU. The EU is trying to pass chat control through a procedural loophole timed right before the summer recess. When attendance drops and thresholds get harder to hit, remember that Parliament rejected mass chat scanning twice. Tomorrow they vote on a shortcut that could reinstate it anyway, posted by Amugus Devilman, and that's a cross post from the Prevost subreddit. And they have a picture. This is the first vote on the same rejected law, chat control 1.0 vote, and it's the EU flag, and it says I'm tired, boss, and it crossed out, it says scanning, fight chat control to EU, and then they added a bunch of more text about that. And yeah, personally, I don't think they should have chat control or any government regulation of technology, is what like the internet or text messages. But ultimately, the government can justify doing whatever it feels like a lot of the time, and oftentimes, there's nothing you can do about it. When someone's in a position of government authority, they can justify doing whatever they feel like. Oftentimes, it just goes to show you it doesn't really matter what the law actually says, it matters how they're enforced. And oftentimes, there's really nothing you can do about what the government enforces, since they're in the position of state authority and you aren't. And that's very much how the law works. Those in positions of authority can justify enforcing law however they feel like, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next we have, Washington secretly moves to fuse the IOF with the U.S. military, posted by Robot Escalon, and that's cross-post from the Normal Day in America subreddit. And yeah, I think they mean IDF instead of IOF, of Israeli Defense Forces. It looks like a clip from Tucker Carlson talking with Dennis Kucinich about that. The National Defense Authorization Act of 2027, yada, yada, yada. And yeah, personally, I don't think the U.S. government should be merging its military with that of Israel's. But ultimately, if they want to justify doing that, there's really nothing you can do. The U.S. is very much an Israeli puppet state, I would say. And oftentimes, there's nothing you can do. When Israel wants something, it's usually going to get it. Or Israel's government at the very least, just because the country's government wants something doesn't mean all its citizens want that. You got to always separate a country's government from its citizens. Just because people vote for something doesn't mean that they agree with everything their government does. In reality, it just matters who has the most resources to get what when it comes to votes and that's very much how politics works. It's very much why I would say the libertarian position is to be anti-democracy, because democracy is inherently forced collectivism, and when you're forced to collectivize, ultimately the people the self-interested parties are going to take the positions of power like they do in Washington and pretty much every other national capital. I think that's something that's important to remember when it comes to anything. People are always going to act in their own self-interest first and foremost. That's very much what politics is. Next we have Afghan Special Forces veteran died in ICE custody after officers denied him an inhaler from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't care for that. I think the U.S. should be treating people nicer, especially as veterans, but ultimately, the U.S. government can justify treating people however it feels like, and oftentimes, there's nothing you can do about it. It's especially since he's an Afghanistan veteran. It reminds me of a post I did to the anarcho-capitalist subreddit just this morning. I said, why does the USA keep getting involved in land wars in Asia? Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran. It's one of the classic blunders. Next thing you know, the country will be going in against the Sicilian when death is on the line. I said the actual answer is the military-industrial complex, but I wanted to do a funny, just quoting Vicini from The Princess Bride. But yeah, ultimately, it just goes to show you that, oftentimes the governments can do stuff you don't like, and there's really nothing you can do about it. Back in the founding fathers' day, they did something about it, but these days, the press would villainize them and call them dangerous insurrectionists and terrorists. And there's really nothing you can do about these days. People are too complacent these days, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, owing of the Department of Justice, DOJ, considers banning transgender people from buying and owning guns from theneedlenews.com, posted by Donald Key, and that's a cross post from the Law subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think anyone who wants to own a gun should be able to own a gun. I personally don't think a lot of transgender people are in the best mental health, but I do think they should be able to own guns if they want to. If they want to justify owning guns, they should be able to. I think the libertarian position is very much to be against red flag laws, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Capitalism and Its Consequences, posted by Amogus Devilman. It looks like they did an angry face emoji. And then that's crosspost from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit. And it's a video, it looks like a video, late-stage capitalism. Child mortality goes down, and then life expectancy goes up, and the GDP goes up, and women's education goes up, and the basic water source goes down, and basic sanitation goes up. And yeah, personally, I do think capitalism isn't perfect, but I definitely do think it's one of the best systems we have currently. Just because the line goes up on a graph doesn't mean things are inherently getting better. I would argue that from a spiritual perspective, America is at one of the worst points it's ever been in living memory. But ultimately, I do think it might just be us being angry online. In reality, I think a lot of our depression comes from that there aren't too many actual problems in the world, and that there are a lot of actual problems in the world, but not really as many on the home front as there have been historically. And I think that's why a lot of people are just so angry and looking for things to be outraged about all the time, especially in regards to politics. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.